I'm not going to talk about anything to do with the Oslo Accords or anything absolutely political about the recent war, so-called war in Gaza or anything. I'm just going to talk about a bit of a trip that I made and why we made it and what happened when we came back. My background is, I'll just say, I'm originally from Gloucestershire. I grew up in Cheltenham and was very much involved when I was at school with the anti-apartheid movement. I must have been probably about 15 at the time, which was how I got involved in the church, because the local vicar was involved in that too, so that's how we met. And I was also a member of the small band of punk rockers at the time, from the town, who used to play in not particularly good bands at all, and travel around, and used to meet up with various tribes, shall we call them, at the time, whether they were mods or rockers or skinheads or rude boys. We'd all meet up at various places. And it struck me as I got older that actually when we grew up was one of the first times we'd actually spoken to each other, because our music was coming from different places. The styles in which we dressed and the people that we went to see were all from different backgrounds and places. And so you'd have your group of young punk rockers, Mohican duck, who'd studied leather jackets at one end of the town, and your mods with their scooters at the other end of Gloucester somewhere, and the rude boys who were into ska were generally hanging around in Winchcombe. This is Gloucestershire. It wasn't all happening there, I can tell you. But it was a sense of style tribes, and Ted Polinis wrote a book some years ago now, it must be over 10 years ago, called Style Tribes, and they had this big exhibition at the V&A, which was very, very interesting, just how people so easily get into their kind of tribal ways of thinking and so on. I wouldn't be seen dead on a Vespa or wearing a parka, for instance. That just wasn't where I was coming from. Come a bit later on into Cable Street. I read a book some years back when I was first training for ordination in the 1980s by Ken Leach. And many of you would have read Ken Leach's books. He was urban theologian in the Stepney Episcopal area for many years and rector of St Matthew's, Bethnal Green. Very, very amazing man, very prayerful, and stood up against the National Front many times within Bethnal Green. And he tells a story about a guy called Neville Palmer. Neville Palmer was a Franciscan, and in 1943, I think it was, maybe even a little bit afterwards, he and a small group of Franciscans moved into number 54 Cable Street. Number 54 Cable Street at that time was a brothel, and it had been used as a brothel for many years, and it is now, the girls are gone, the people are gone, and so they moved in there in Cable Street. And Cable Street at this time, as many of you who know your East End history, will know that it was the place where merchants and lots of the early drug trafficking was coming in to East London. And it became a real multicultural community with people from Bangladesh, from obviously from India, from West Africa, and various other places. And they also had their own cafes, their own places to meet, their own music and their own cultures and so on. And it was part of Neville Palmer's job, and he was apparently a very, very skinny guy with very tattered, greening kind of habit, which was brown apparently at one time. Very nervous guy. But he made it his mission, his job, in that small area, Cable Street, in many years, in trying in a small way, bringing these people together through his faith and his beliefs in the gospel. And his belief always was that you need to bloom where you are planted, to use a phrase, to be rooted in your community and to love each and every person, whatever their tribal background or culture or religion and so on. They were all part of God's plan. And particularly today when we focus on the Annunciation, Mary becoming pregnant, that great Magnificat about Jesus, this baby will be for all things, God for the whole world. And this was Neville's thing. Back 20 years ago, I went to the Holy Land, kicking and screaming. I never wanted to go. I thought it was going to be like a Disneyland tour of just holy shrines and places and churches, and just a place to visit and come back. And for me, I was kind of rooted in my faith, and I didn't need to go off there and see all this. And this was back in 1994, and before the second Intifada and after the first. And at that point, there seemed to be much hope around. People seemed to be mixing. There was a lot more of the mixing, particularly in the Israeli Arab towns like Nazareth and various places like that, where they had been for years, grown up together. The kids had grown up together, but Jewish and Arab worked together also in their hotels and various shops and so on. Then as the years went on, and when Sharon walked up to the Temple Mount and everything kicked off, whether we saw that as a sign of provocation or not, whatever our politics are, and whatever our thoughts are, that's when it all started to kick off again. And so people started to distrust each other once again. It seemed to me the more and more I went, the more fractured people were, the more each other were driving wedges between the other. And those, shall we call, tribes, were starting to move further and further away. And this isn't true with everybody, but that's how it felt to me, move further and further away. And then the separation barrier, the wall, the apartheid wall, whatever you want to call it, the fence, started to go up around the Bethlehem district, but also just inside the Green Line, cutting off many, many villages. There are maps here, and you can take maps for what they are. As many say, all maps are propaganda, but there are some here which might be interesting to you. Just have a look at these while I'm talking, rabbiting on. So, I very much, which is my way, came down on the side of the Palestinian people, of those particularly that I'd met in Bethlehem, particularly with the schools that I visited in Bethany for the young people, both Christians and Muslims, and began to take groups to visit them. And they were beginning to get more and more and more cut off from the separation barrier. And as you know, that there are various permits, restrictions of movement, which harks right back for me, in my mind, to the apartheid system in South Africa. There are people that I know who aren't allowed to travel to hospitals to Jerusalem beyond the wall with their children. The father can because he was born in Bethlehem, but the mother can't because she was born in Ramallah. So it's very, very difficult and very, very hard. And then I was given the opportunity to meet with some Jews and some Muslims and some Christians from around the UK and further afield to actually work on how we might journey through that region together. And we were interviewed and selected, I think, for our oddities and for our so-called extremisms on either side. Among the 12 of us, 4 Muslims, 4 Jews and 4 Christians, there was a joke there somewhere, there were a guy who I guess I would describe as an absolute Zionist, a right who had no time at all for the Palestinian cause. He was a Messianic Jew as well, so he believed that Jesus was the Messiah. He always wore a kippah, and really on that side. On the other end of that was probably me, really, who was a bit of a lefty, and Anglican priest, very pro-Palestinian, been on rallies and carried the flag, and so on. And then in the middle of all that, we had a Pakistani journalist woman who refused to wear the veil anywhere she went. We had a Canadian Roman Catholic Christian young woman who's an academic, a guy who's an Anglican priest who works for the Methodist Church in the Queens in Birmingham, who became a good friend, and a female Jewish rabbi who was doing stuff at the West London Synagogue, and an academic Jewish woman who was converted to Judaism because of her boyfriend, and then he left her, but she still remained Jewish and teaches in the Hebrew University. And another Muslim guy called Mohammed, who went to Cambridge University, a white guy, and an Anglican who converted to Islam. And so there was us lot together, having to plan this journey through the Holy Land. Big ask, a big ask for all of us. And we did it through the St. Ethelburger Centre of Reconciliation and Peace. So it was headed up by a guy called Simon Keyes, who many of you might know, who heads up the centre there. And he's always worked all of his life for bringing people together, to try to find ways through for peace and dialogue, to listen to the narratives of each other. And he was the guy who led the Dalai Lama along the Falls Road and handed him over at the border to the group waiting at the other side. Very well respected guy, and he knew what he was doing with us, I think. But it meant that we had to spend 3 days living together before we were even allowed to go on this journey. And you can imagine how fired up we all got with each other's views, politically, religiously, economically, the whole thing. And after we had done our getting to know each other, we travelled. And we travelled to the airport. And we travelled on the aeroplane with El Al. And El Al are the flag carriers for the State of Israel. Of course, rightly so, their security has to be extremely tight. Because many people are after destroying the State of Israel. But it's a very interesting experience, even before you leave. And those of you who've been to the Holy Land would have experienced these checks anyway at the airport. But they didn't know what to make of us at all, and couldn't work us out why the hell we were all travelling together, how we knew each other, where we were from, why were a Jewish female rabbi travelling with a Muslim leftist Pakistani woman on the same trip. Why are there people wearing collars? What's it all about? And so we were interrogated for 3 hours, each in different places, and grounded the aeroplane for up to 5 hours before they let us on, which made us really unpopular by the time we walked on the aeroplane. But it gave me a feeling of how it must feel to live both in Israel and within occupied Palestinian territories. That this constant mistrust of each other, this constant fear of each other and each other's motives. We travelled to massive settlements, and before this time I had never agreed to go with anyone onto an Israeli settlement, because for me the settlement building is outrageous and is a way of confiscating Palestinian land. When you look around the Bethlehem area, you're not just surrounded by walls and fences and checkpoints, but also settlements. It's the reason that I was no way going to go. But for the cause, and for the brothers and sisters, we went. And we went, and we had an absolutely wonderful time, and everybody gave us great hospitality, gave us fantastic food, gave us their narrative. And of course the narrative was many of them had family who had suffered during the persecution in Europe, Holocaust, obviously, and this was a chance to start again and to grow a new state. Of course, this is where the whole kibbutz thing, all started, coming together as a community. My wife spent lots of time in the 70s on kibbutz, and building up this, not just an area of safety, but an area where actually we could be a nation as a Jewish people. We could be ourselves. And so we had great discussions over lots of things, and we disagreed and argued and stuff, but the hospitality was great. And then a couple of days later, we spent time in Bethlehem. Some of us living with a Christian family, and some of us living with Muslim families also, and hearing their stories. So what you would have is, in each household, whether we were up on the huge settlement or down within the Palestinian territories, you would have a Muslim, a Jew and a Christian from our group staying with each household. by the time we'd finished and got back, we'd actually had, I think, the majority of us become very, very close. We'd heard various narratives from the Israeli side, various narratives from the Palestinian side. We were, I think because of our experience of meeting before we went, able to listen. And that is something which we don't do. Whether it is within the politics of our own wards and constituencies within London, or the wider country, or whether we're looking at political stuff nationally, worldwide, we don't listen. And this just struck me for the first time after 20 odd years of being an all-day priest, that I haven't been listening to anybody actually hear confession. Was I listening? Oh, I hope so. Maybe not. But this ability to listen is really important, because from everybody we met, listen to all of their stories, there was truth, I think, within all of it. And of course, for each person's truth is real and that true. And the story of the Jewish people absolutely needs to be heard and listened to. So does that of the Palestinian people, absolutely. For those who are holed up in Gaza and imprisoned, and they are imprisoned in that area, they need to be listened to. How often do we see within the media and social media those who do the speaking? It's usually the people that are concentrated on within Gaza are usually representatives of Hamas, usually, or Islamic Jihad. And on the other hand, within the Israeli state, it's the spokesman mainly for the political right. And like everywhere in the world, we are stuck in the middle. People are stuck in the middle. It was an amazing opportunity to meet some incredible Israeli people also. This is Rachel, and she is the head of ICAD, which is the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions. Born and bred Jewish person in Israel, very, very intelligent, wow, really big brain, in her 30s. And she spends much of her time, and with her committee, protecting farmers in Palestinian areas from having their homes destroyed. And there's a couple of pictures of destroyed houses. My mate's got a pink shirt, so it's a destroyed house there, for various reasons, and really petty reasons, generally. So she's an incredible Israeli woman who is actually also very religious, very devout, and recognises that the state of Israel absolutely has a right to exist. These are some of my children. For my school, I take sixth forms from Bethnal Green to the Holy Land, and we visit various places. This is a school that we work with in Jenin, which is in the north of the West Bank. And again, it's meeting the children. It's meeting the children that makes you want to listen, and to their narratives. There's a couple of incredible places near Nazareth where people live together in a village. So you have Jewish people, Palestinian people, living as a kind of a commune. There's 80 families on this place. They have their education together, they eat together, do their recreation together. And it is a real, gives you a real sense of what could be. What could be, if only we could listen. If only we could listen to each other's stories and narratives. 2 minutes. So, just to kind of sum that up. One, if you haven't been, it's worth going. And really seeing for yourselves what's happening on the ground. Because what happens on the ground is what's important for us. I am still, in my heart, come down very much on the side of those who are struggling within Gaza. Lots of my friends, both Muslims and Christians, live behind the barrier, either in Bethlehem or Nablus or Hebron or Ramallah, and it's very difficult to visit them and very difficult for them to come out. The guides that I use are always Muslims and Christians, but we always make sure that we work with the rabbis for human rights and meet their lawyers and the work that they do. It's just about opening up. Because at the end of the day, standing here in the church, our Christian response has to be focused and anchored within the Gospels. And for me, that is something about our baptismal vows, and those baptismal vows that we carry around us every single day of our lives, that which is grafted into us through the grace of God, through the Holy Spirit. And that is, which we say in our baptismal rite, in some of our churches, is that we say, whether it's a child or an adult, that we pray that they will live the Christian life. And the Christian life is striving for justice, working for peace, uplifting the poor, welcoming the foreigner, comforting the distressed, and standing up for truth against all that is deceitful and false. I think our calling must be these days, in particularly as Christian people, is to respond to reconciliation. Most of the Muslims and Jewish people who I have met are distressed about the kind of imprisonment of the Christian community, of those who are from the Christian community who are being forced to leave. And that is getting lower and lower to less than 1% now within the Holy Land. And everybody, whether they are socialists or right-wingers or whatever they are, saying we need the Christian community to remain here because they are the voice of reconciliation. And they say that genuinely. And I think that's what we are called to be in these days. Not just within the Middle East, but here, and it needs to be done here too. So thank you for listening to that.